Well, you guys came back. That's good. I didn't run anybody off. That's good. Always good to see people back. Never know. So we got through 3 of 8 lessons last week. Hopefully, we'll get through the final 5 tonight. Right. Lesson number 4. So if you turn your page to lesson number 4, that's where we're going to start today. It's a lesson about perspective. Discontent. Now, I put that there. We could write down the definition. What I came up with is discontent is dissatisfaction with one's circumstances. Dissatisfaction with one's circumstances. Discontent distorts our perspective and it twists our view on our reality. Now in Exodus 16, we see how the entire perspective of the Israelites is starting to become warped. And they begin to rewrite their own history. Discontent can play with our minds. We start to maximize how bad it is now, in our current state, in our current condition. And we look back at the past with rose-colored glasses, how things used to be, the good old days, the glory days, whatever song you want to pick. I mean, you remember the best of the best, and you forget all the other things. So in 16:3, Exodus 16:3 says this, "And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out in the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." They've come to this point. They've been delivered. But all they can see is their circumstances today. All they can see is the fact that they're hungry and they're wandering around in this desert and they want to get to this promise of milk and honey filled land, right? And they start to think it would have been better if we'd have just stayed in Egypt and died there. But now you brought us out here to the desert to starve us to death, right? A little dramatic, right? I mean, it sounds like a movie. Like you can see the actors just like really laying on the drama. But they're not asking for much, just death, right? They should have just left us there where we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. What? What are they talking about? Let's think for a moment what they were doing in Egypt. They were slave labor for the Pharaoh. Now the Pharaoh may have been sitting around eating pots of meat at will, right? Chances are they were not. They were working. Some of them were forced into labor, forced into servitude. They were being beaten and they were miserable. That's why they wanted out in the first place. But now they're looking back with a distorted light because times right now are hard. This is what discontent can do. It can do this to all of us. When our right now gets hard, we look about the way that it used to be and how great it was. Those good old days weren't all good. Those glory days weren't so full of glory. You remember them in a separate light than they actually were. Are there any ways that you guys let discontent twist your reality? Can anybody think of anything they'd like to share? You just shout it out. We don't have to discuss it long term. But anything that comes to mind in our society these days? Comparison, right? Yeah, competition, work ethic. What do you got? Discontent has creeped in. Yeah, that's a big one right there. Anything else? Does anybody have any tips on how to live a life of being content that could be helpful in a group situation? Service, that's a good one. How do you learn how to be content when you're constantly comparing yourself to other people? Your neighbor's house is 3 times the size of your house. You've got 2 boats and you only have 1. Right? Well, they got to pay the taxes on it. Gratitude, the attitude of gratitude, right? We have to learn that. That's not something that is just inside of us. We're wicked, wicked people. Like, we have to learn that. The Apostle Paul, probably the most content person in the Bible. And look at the circumstances he was under. How do we get there? How do we get there? To be imprisoned and work harder than the people who were outside of the prison, spreading the gospel, teaching his people, lifting them up, encouraging them, witnessing to the guards in-house, worshiping at midnight, changing one heart at a time. How do we get there? Any other tips? He said service, giving. Yeah, it's better to give, to receive. See, so that's our perspective. We can choose to be content, or we can choose to be discontent, right? We can let that in. We can give into that temptation. Or we can learn how to be content, right? Which is not an easy thing to do, but it's a very helpful lesson. So that's the lesson about perspective. And it leads right into another lesson about provision. Specifically, the manna. Last week we talked about the water and how they grumbled and complained upon arriving, and the water wasn't good. And God told Moses, throw a log in there, purifies the water. They've got it. Everyone's thirst was quenched. They stopped grumbling for 10 seconds and found something else to complain about, right? One day at a time. We're invited into a journey of living one day at a time. Israel has grumbled and complained. They've become discontent, and they've begun to look back on those glory days when they were in Egypt. Even though they were slave labor, even though they had no freedom, they at least had food on the table. Or so they say. And we might expect God to get upset at this. Might get a little impatient with his chosen people. Might get a little angry. But in this instance, Right. But in this instance, he's very gracious. And he just keeps providing. He gives them meat in the form of quail. And he gives them bread in the form of manna, which name literally translates to what is it? A lot of people think it was just bread. A lot of people think it was like a sweet treat or like a donut. I know there's one pastor that I watch, he said, it was the original Krispy Kreme donuts. Like, God just threw them out hot and ready in the morning, every morning. But God provided. God's provision is wonderful. And it's exactly what they needed at that time. And there is enough for everyone. Every day, one day at a time, God gives his people exactly what they need. If there's any squeamish people here, you might want to close your ears for the next 10 seconds. In an interesting twist, anytime the people gathered more than they needed, and they tried to stockpile it would rot and fill with maggots. But, to their amazement, when they gathered twice as much come Friday evening, for the Sabbath day, as they were commanded to do, the next day, the manna was fresh. God was in control. So what is he trying to teach his people? And to trust, right? Trust me. I've got this. I will give you what you need. In Deuteronomy 8:3, Moses is looking back on this. Way past, after the fact. He says, God humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then fed you with manna. Have you ever been humbled by God? Just so he could pick you up again? I know I have. Many times. Put in a spot, nowhere to go, nowhere to turn, no farther to fall, just so he could pick me back up. I'd say, look, I got this. Just trust my way. Your way stinks. Look where it got you, right? Trust my way. God humbles you, causing you to hunger, so he can feed you. That's what Moses said in Deuteronomy. God was teaching his people to depend on him. They could not rely on their own strength, on their own wisdom, or their own resources. Nothing they could do is going to get them through. Only God can provide what they need. He has something important to teach them, and us as well. That if you start worrying about tomorrow, you're going to worry your whole life long. If you start worrying about tomorrow, you're going to worry your whole life long. We don't need to ask for the ability to cross a bridge that we haven't yet reached. When you get to that bridge, God will give you the ability to get over it. Don't worry about it 10 days before you get there. So my challenge is that we need to learn to pray something that sounds like this. God, I will trust you for this day. I'll trust you to give me my daily bread. God, give me manna for just today. God, give me enough wisdom for just today. God, give me enough patience to get through this day. God, give me enough courage that I can face this day. God, give me enough love to handle this day. And as best I can, God, I will trust that when I wake up tomorrow, you will be there with me and you will help me tomorrow. I'm not going to try to collect more from you than I need. I want to learn to trust you today for this day. Jesus lived this way. As followers of Christ, I think it would do us a lot of good to learn dependence again. Jesus, when he taught us how to pray, he said, give me this day my daily bread. He had no home. He was constantly taken care of. God provides. I want to open it up. There's numerous stories. I know I've heard Lee tell many about the provision of God in his life. Does anybody else have any stories about God providing in a just crazy, cool, awesome way? Like when you really don't know where you're going to go, don't know where that next meal's going to come from, don't know anything and God just, anybody?
I told him, don't worry about it.
Or you just let it go?
Yeah, let it go. And he said it bothered him all those years. He gave me $300.
There you go.
I gave that lady $100.
Gave that lady the $100.
I said, how would get an altar?
Well, you just asked for 100.
There's that human under it. I guess I can.
My
That's the human side of it right there.
my father-in-law. That was it. My father-in-law, he's a construction worker. He's a general contractor for 50 years. And he always tells a story, and it's a very lighthearted story. It's not about money or anything, but it's about, he said he was on a job, and he forgot his lunch that day, and he was just really craving a bologna sandwich. And he said, I'm just going to pray. He said, God, I would really like a bologna sandwich right now. And if you could give me that, that would be really cool, and that was it. He just let it go. And he said about 20 minutes later, one of the other coworkers said, hey, I got an extra sandwich. Does anybody want one? And he said, what is it? He said, it's bologna. He said, God, you're awesome. And he tells that story religiously. It's like, it's not. It's not, And there are some financial ones I've heard Lee tell, working in youth ministry all those years, and times get pretty tight. And then all of a sudden there's money on your desk or money in an envelope coming to your house. Like I heard Chuck Smith, when he started in probably 50s, I guess, or whenever he started, he said they were making $25 a week. And his rent was $40 a month, so they had to live pretty tight. And he said sometimes it got down to they didn't know when they were going to be able to buy groceries or whatever, and he just put it in God's hands. And he said most of those times he'd go to the mailbox and there'd be a nice letter. Inside it would be a $10 bill or a $5 bill and say, we love you, here's some money. And God provides in different ways. It's crazy. I have one that it was the strangest. I got money from the state of Missouri. That was I have no idea where it came. No, I already did. It was like $80, but it was it's like there was a bill due and everything was allocated, and I was like, it's pretty tight. And we were talking about what we're gonna do. And then the next day I got this bill, or I got this check for $87 or something from the state of Missouri. I don't know what it was for, but I cashed that thing and put it in a bank and didn't ask any questions, that's for sure. But no, yeah, for sure. There you go. A little faith. Yeah, the math doesn't make sense. Doesn't have to. Doesn't have to. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Anybody else? I love stories. Stories are good. Darby. All right, well, let's jump to lesson 6. We might get through all these. A lesson about presence. After all God has done, the 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the deliverance from Pharaoh, the destruction of the army, the provision of manna and water, they are still asking this question. Is the Lord really among us? I mean, think about that. They're literally following a pillar of fire and a cloud by day, a fire by night. When has that ever happened? Ever? except right in this time period. Like, and they're still saying, is the Lord really here? Did Pharaoh really drown in the ocean? Like, did we do that? Was that because we're cool? Like, I mean, I don't understand them, but I guess I don't have to. Yeah. Every day they forget and they move on to the new problem in hand. So we, like the people of Israel, need to remember, some of us need to learn for the first time, that God is with us, even when we are too blind to see it, and too hard-hearted to feel his presence. So even though they question his presence, once more, he is patient. Once more, he provides. He leads them to Mount Sinai, and Moses is called to meet God on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. And the people have one job. All they have to do is wait for Moses to come back down. They're not hungry. They have manna. They aren't thirsty. They got clean water. All they have to do is just wait. And they need to have enough faith to wait. Which brings me to this question. How hard is it for you to wait? We already mentioned this. We couldn't wait to get here because we talked about it before, right? Yeah. It's hard for me. I don't know that it's easy on any. I don't know if there's any human walking the face of the earth that's good at waiting. It could be a challenge to find one. You just get used to it. Waiting on a woman? Is that what you're talking about? Only Terry would go there. Linda, we love you. Don't worry about that guy. Don't worry about that guy. But we talked about it earlier about we come from this instant gratification mindset, right? Like we've been programmed, fast food, microwaves, everything. Like why cook dinner for an hour and a half when I can cook this in 2.5 minutes and eat it and then have like an hour and 20 minutes to do whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's like we've changed our way of thinking. We've tried to eliminate waiting for anything. But God works in a different way than that. He tells us. He continues to say, just wait, just wait, just wait. Well, the people of Israel have a hard time too. So they go up to Aaron and they say, well, I lost my place. There we go. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come make us gods who will go before us. God's been going before them this whole time. They want something they can hold in their hand. And then they say, as for this fellow Moses, notice the language. They are distancing themselves from him, right? Like, what's that guy? That guy that went up on the mountain? Old, what's his name, right? That's pretty much the message. As for this guy, he should have been back by now, right? You make us gods. We're coming to you. You're in control now. So the people cry out, make us gods. They don't want to wait. They are not interested in God's timing. I feel like we can fall into that trap too. We are not interested in God's timing. We're interested in what we want right now. No, they didn't do it. It was just a golden cat. I mean, but they're crazy people. And literally they had the pillar of fire and the cloud that went before them. This thing they're asking this to do. But hindsight. Right, yeah. Right, you go up there. You handle that business. But they just want to get out of this desert and get to the milk and honey. We can hear their voices crying throughout history. Are we there yet? Like we talked about last week, right? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? They're unwilling to wait for the 40 days. They want to control God rather than have him lead their lives. Is that not what we try to do too? We try to tell God how we're going to live instead of allowing him to lead us and follow as we should, right? We want that control. That control gives us power, and mankind craves power. A lot of us are just like Israel with their idol. We can get our way when we serve this. We can do what we want when we serve this. But with God, we must listen to him, and we must follow his way. So lesson 7, I'll try and squeeze these in. A lesson about humility. So we need to celebrate God's work in others and through others. 2 men in the camp of Israel began to prophesy, and their names are Eldad and Medad, or Eldad and Medad, or I don't speak Hebrew. You can take your pick of what you want to call them, but I'm going to go with Eldad and Medad. So up to this point, Moses was the only one who did this. He was the only one who would prophesy, the only one who would hear from God and tell them what they're doing. And then suddenly, the Spirit descends on these 2 men out of the blue. They weren't expecting it, and then they began to speak prophetic words. And when this happens, Joshua, who's Moses' second in command, tells them to stop. In Joshua's mind, only Moses is supposed to do this job. Only Moses is supposed to prophesy. It's one of the things that makes Moses special. Since Joshua is Moses' VP, it makes Joshua special that Moses does this. But if everybody starts doing it, they won't be as special as they were before, right? But Moses looks at it in a different way. Joshua says, "Moses, my Lord, stop them." And Moses replies, "Are you jealous for my sake? I wish all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them." Fast forward, the day of Pentecost. Moses' words ring true. Moses is humble. He really doesn't want to be special. He really doesn't want to be unique. He's not trying to be more spiritual than all the other people. God chose Moses to do this job. He tried to talk God out of it. It didn't work. But Moses is saying, other people can do this. Let's celebrate the fact that God chose these people to move through, to work through, to speak through. So how can we celebrate God working in the people around us? Any ideas? What was that? Praise them. Say thank you. Recognize them. Maybe give them some encouragement. Show up on Wednesday night. That's not easy. Work with them. How do we celebrate people? Because a lot of the time we get so focused on what we're doing, even though we see God doing something great in somebody else, we don't necessarily acknowledge it. We don't necessarily do anything with those people. We just kind of focus on what we're doing. I think we can learn by celebrating each other's victories. All right. We're cruising down this line. I got to get 8 in. Lee wants to teach next week, so all right. A lesson about fear and faith. This is the last and final one. So the good news and the bad news. Moses sends out 12 spies. They're gone for 40 days. There's that number again. In Numbers 13:27, it shows us what they found. They're clear that the reports of the amazing bounty of this land were not exaggerated. They come back and they say, yep, that's just like he told us it was. It's beautiful. It's overflowing with milk and honey, fruit. But 10 of the spies bring back a bad report. And they're discouraging the people from even attempting to go in. Getting crazy out there. All right. Party time. Sounds like my house. Yeah. Now, 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, they gave a different report. So let's turn to Numbers 13, chapter 30, which I used to have marked, but I moved last night for youth group. 13:30. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. And then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So now there's a difference of opinion. Joshua and Caleb are saying, we can do this. Everyone else is saying, we cannot, right? We shouldn't even try. Like, it's impossible to go and take this land. So this is a lesson in fear and faith. Fear robs us of joy and the potential of walking with God to new and exciting places. But faith leads us on an exciting journey of daily trusting in God. Down to verse 32. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers. And so we seemed to them. So they're saying, in essence, we can't attack these people. They're huge. They're stronger than us. We saw giants there. But here's the kicker. The main sentence that I want you to grasp is they said this: we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. And we looked the same to them. Not only did they feel like they had no strength, but they let the poison of their own fear spread through the entire people of Israel. And now they all have this grasshopper complex. And they think that they can't do it. Many of these folks never really recovered from the years of bondage in Egypt and that slave mentality. All they've ever been is somebody's slave. They've never had any dreams. They've never had any power in their own life. And the tragedy is that this generation is never going to see themselves as anything but grasshoppers. And they will not allow hope and joy to fill their hearts. And they will not allow themselves to trust God for the great adventure He wants to lead them through. God wants His children to follow Him in faith. And He wants us to trust in His provision, to trust in His power, and to trust in His faithfulness. And when we do, we will enter a life of joy and a journey of faith that is beyond our wildest dreams. Faith is believing what you do not yet see. Its reward is to see what you believe. That's Augustine. God doesn't desert his people. He waits with these folks in the desert for 40 years. And he holds them in his arms while a new generation grows up. A generation that will walk by faith into God's plan. And he forgives them, and he stays with them, and he keeps watch over them, and he keeps the manna coming. And God wants us to be that new generation. God wants us to be a generation of risk-taking, faith-filled adventurers. He's asking us to do something fresh. He's asking us to do something new. Maybe, for you, that's an involvement in a ministry of some kind. Maybe it's leading a small group. Maybe it's attending a small group. Maybe it's a new level of commitment with your family at home. Maybe it's a new financial adventure with a new level of sacrifice and giving. Whatever the commitment God is asking you to make, you should enter it with joy. Enter the blessing of being in God's will. So, we got 5 minutes. Has anybody ever dealt with this grasshopper complex? Feeling that you are too small, you are not powerful enough, you can't do it, right? Well, at some point, everybody faces it, right? Do you have any stories that you like to tell about a time that you maybe overcame that grasshopper complex in your life? Does anybody want to pray us out? I'm going to volunteer.